Now, I'd like to start by talking about the killing that occurred recently in Liverpool of an 11-year-old boy by probably a 13-year-old white boy who was a member of a gang from a particular estate on the margins of the city. Now, the estates from which these gangs come were quality estates. They weren't sink estates. These were deliberately designed estates built after the war and way through into the planning days of the 1960s. So the idea that these are totally deprived communities that have produced these types of adolescent gangs is partly, at the very least, untrue. Now, the phenomenon of the gang that we're seeing is, although these gangs in Liverpool, which is still 90% white and is in one sense where England partly ends on one particular English seaboard, there's a degree to which these gangs are an importation from the third world within the West, because their model is in the United States. In the 1950s and 1960s, in many black areas in the United States, the acceleration of family decline was such that many males have 5 or 6 fathers, only one of which is their biological father, before the age of majority. The average age of a criminally inclined black male's lifespan in Washington, D.C., which is in one sense the capital of the world, is 26. 26, because they're usually, if they're criminally involved, dealing in crack cocaine, and they're shot by somebody nastier and more heavily armed than themselves. That lifespan is less than half the one that they had even under slavery in the Deep South, before manumission. Now, this type of phenomenon, whereby people without families, and without male guardians or fathers, and are in a chaotic mental and other state, seek solidarity, seek a pseudo-family, and seek a community of themselves through the gang, has spread out from these ghettos to include Latino groups in Los Angeles, and in Chicago, and in New York, and elsewhere. Others who feel themselves dispossessed or marginalized, including lumpen proletarian white gangs, have proliferated in these cities. There are 8,000 gangs in Los Angeles alone. And without really noticing it, in the last 20 years, since Margaret Thatcher was Premier, this phenomenon has begun here. Because whole generations have grown up in inner cities and in suburban outreach zones, always on benefit, with no fathers, with little education, with little structure, drinking from 13, sexual relationships from 14, no proper structuring of their lives, no national service, little idea of who they are. 7 million can't read or write in this country amongst the adult population. 40% basically completely fail at school. And they feed these gangs in the cities. In parts of western Birmingham, there are Asian gangs of different dispensations from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. There are mixed race gangs, there are black gangs, and there are white gangs. The mixed race gang is a sort of compartmentalisation of all those who don't fit into the others. Kosovans and so on would join at this present time such a gang until they mass together enough to form one of their own. They get guns by the virtue of the fact that they can create them through replicas. They buy them in pubs. They're decommissioned and other weapons that come over from ex-paramilitary organisations in Northern Ireland. That's where a lot of them in Liverpool get them from. Southeastern Europe, after the Yugoslavian Civil War, is awash with weapons. They come over. Gradually they creep in. After the Dunblane massacre, where a lone psychopath went mad in a school gymnasium 10 or more years ago, handguns, even for our Olympic shooting team, were outlawed. But there's now more than 1 million of them in the society than there was prior to the ban. Now, these gangs proliferate because there is an absence of any social structure for those at the bottom. And they prey on many of the young men who join them and who achieve socialisation through them. Gradually, their influence creeps out into more lower middle class and middle class areas, which is usually when politicians begin to notice them and seek to corral them and push them back into ghetto areas. In the United States, increasingly, cities are not only racially zoned, but are racially policed, where policemen from different ethnic and racial groups police their own groups because they will only accept a degree of authoritarian discipline from somebody inside their own group. Police forces are ethnically aligned and have unions within them. and this is already beginning in our own country. In the Metropolitan Police, there is a Muslim Association for Police Officers, there is a Black Association for Police Officers, which occasionally contains Asian officers, who of course are not black, and there is a homosexual union for police officers in the Metropolitan Police. So what you have is the segmentation and ghettoisation of the society, and those that police it, because those that are in it will not accept authority unless somebody giving it to them, if you like, is of the same partiality or grouping as themselves. And so you will see breakdown and vituperity in law, and in those that wear the yellow fluorescent jackets over the blue, and you will see it in the society that they're attempting to police, in inverted commas. And in many American cities, citizens in the know the districts that you can't go to, literally can't go to, and can't even pass through. New York's a famous example. Even under Giuliani, who was probably attempted as hard-line and anti-criminal drive as any Western liberal-minded democratic politician can possibly do within present circumstances. So much so that there were times during his tenure that technically parts of New York were safer than parts of our own capital, London. But nevertheless, irrespective of all that, when commuters come in from the outer part of New York, white commuters, they seal the trains and they go through the black areas and end up in the centre of the commercial districts of the city of Manhattan. And then they go out again in the same way. These cities are zoned. And although our society has not yet reached that point, much of the early signs of it are already here, in tacit segregation, in groups in northern towns that shop at different times. In Oldham it's known that the Asians from different dispensations, little old ladies and so on, shop at different times, and it's sort of known. They go from different bus stops into the centre. It's sort of known. The whites are in the town at a certain time, and the others at a certain time. Groups arrange these things semi-privately and volitionally amongst themselves. Many liberal politicians and religious leaders are now warning about the dangers of segregation. We're sleepwalking towards apartheid. Voluntary apartheid, they call it. It's happening because, in a sense, people naturally crowd together with their own group for comfort and security in relation to where they live, where they shop, where they play, where they want their children to go to school. This means that schooling becomes an issue of internal cultural civil war within a society where people do all sorts of things, particularly as their children approach secondary school age. They suddenly become religious because they want to get their children into a school which is religious. Why do they want to do that? Because there's some structure and some residual resistance from the past to the processes of what has characterised comprehensivisation. This means that a significant number of the youth who go to religiously minded schools leave at 16, and they've been in school for 11 years by that time, and they're able to read, they're able to write, they're able to do arithmetic, they're able to function in the society. They're not functionally illiterate, which gives them a chance in the society. That's why people get religion when their children are around 10 or 11. Even the leader of the Tories, Cameron's doing it. People have seen him with his wife going to church. And his children are approaching this age of sort of secondary school majority. Everyone plays these games. Middle class people move from one catchment area to another. They swap houses and move around in relation to particular schools. Because when mass comprehensivisation came in, there's a hierarchy in comprehensive schools, just as there was a hierarchy before them, and there'll be a hierarchy after they're going, and New Labour's actually getting rid of them. Because although they won't tell you, the comprehensive school has been a failure, a mass failure, generated in from the 1970s and ideas that preceded it. That all can be equal and all can have prizes. That the grammar schools were invidious and should be done away with without an idea of something better to replace them. One of the reasons that youth is increasingly felt to be threatening by people over 30, particularly when they gather outside pubs, outside shopping centres, on Friday and Saturday nights, when they go twocking vehicles on the edge of towns and so on. 43% of people over 18 say they're frightened to leave their own homes because of the amount of crime that's designated in the media. Now, much of this is mental. Britain is a slightly safer society than many others, and yet the creep of each year, as violent crime becomes more ingrained and people become more tolerant to its effects or adapt their own lives to the prospect of it. People move around know when there are certain situations to avoid. Many of our town centres have been turned into drunken binge zones, particularly on Friday and Saturday nights. This is because bar after bar has replaced business after business that's either gone to shopping centres on the periphery, or moved further afield, or been replaced by warehousing hypermarkets, which have driven out small traders and ripped the civic centre out of many towns and the smaller parts of cities as you go in, because cities really are interconnected suburban towns leading towards a centre. Now, many people as they walk around this society dimly discern that there are all sorts of things wrong with it and that they don't like it. But although there's a lot of moaning and there's a lot of complaining, particularly from indigenous English and British people, there still is a reluctance to take the political course of action that will lead to a reversal. A reversal of the decline which has gone on from the 1960s and that was based on ideas that preceded them but came to a crescendo in that particular decade. In that decade, ideas which were regarded as radically alternative and even off-theme became regarded as normal. 50 years on, we can see that many things that would have been regarded as anathema to our grandparents' generation are now norms which are imposed by social policing. And if you disagree with them, you'll lose your job, or you'll face, particularly if you work in the state sector, but also elsewhere. You will be harassed for opposing things now which would be regarded as normal to oppose prior to 1960. I was born in 1962. And when I became conscious of the decline in this society, it seems to have slightly accelerated with the odd period of arrested deceleration, but it's basically gone downhill in the texture of our life in each decade, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and into the new millennium. Everywhere you look, there are significant problems in this society. 14% of England is now non-white, and the model of the society is the United States. Since the late 1960s in the United States, between 70 and 100 million persons of colour have entered the Federal American Republic. America is now about 200 million whites and 100 million not. White Americans will, on present demographic trends, be a clear and evident minority in 50 to 60 years. Political correctness, so called, has partly been introduced by many liberals as an insurance policy for when whites are in the minority. They're already in the minority in California, they're already in the minority in the city of New York, they are on the cusp of being a minority in George Bush's own state of Texas. They're the three linchpins and pillars of major political and electoral success in the United States. You've got to take Texas or New York or California, you've got to take two of those three to get into the White House. And if the Democrats take America back and push it even slightly further to the left, there is a degree to which they will have to take two out of those three states. Now, what happens in the United States, globally and internally, tends to be followed on by the rest of Western Europe and residually post-communist Eastern Europe as well. This is because America dominates the rest of the world without really knowing how to manage it, and its system is reflected elsewhere. People, as they wander around British towns and cities today, wonder why the better part of a quarter to a third of the people in the streets are not European. People talk vaguely about conspiracies, or it didn't happen to be like this when I was younger, and this sort of thing. These people are here because successive governments, New Labour very radically in the decades since their landslide election in 97, have opened the door wider and wider and wider, because a system is being introduced whereby capital, money, raw money, moves round the world endlessly. A dealer in the City of London, or the Hong Kong Exchange, or the German and New York markets can put his thumb on the screen, and $10 million can move in 20 seconds to the Japanese exchange. And just as money moves, labour moves. Migration is partly the movement of labour, which corresponds to the movement of capital. We now have every Western society is making less and producing less, and has to make its money on the margin. It's called marginal utility economics. This means you have to keep wages low, you have to have lots of service sectors, you have to fiddle around post-production, you have to have lots of immigrants coming in from all over the world, this is the theory, and you keep everybody spending on services to keep things going. And this is why all of our societies now are endlessly in credit and in debt upon the debt, and then people trade on the debt. And they trade on the debts that others have. And they have markets on markets which trade on the prospect of debt in the future, grey markets they're called. There's a crisis going on in world economics at the moment, where at the margin markets are shuddering and losing hundreds of points a day and going down 4 or 8 or 10% in a day, in an hour, in New York, in Tokyo, in Hong Kong, in France, in Germany, in Canada, here, elsewhere. And the Indian and Chinese exchanges are now being added in to this global system. China and India will have an economy equal to the US now in 45 years. China will be the equal of the US militarily in 45 years. Chinese diplomats talk of the next century, after which we'll all be dead, as the era of the yellow man. China certainly dreams of a degree of world domination once they have the economic power so to do. Other groups do not delude themselves that life is liberal-minded and kindness in art to others will beget reciprocity at some date in the future. China is buying Africa now and is arming the insurgency in Iraq. And in the next 2 to 3 years, my view is that America will go down to a catastrophic defeat in Iraq. They are fighting to stave off defeat now. There's no talk of victory. The greatest general in their generation, Petraeus, is now in charge of their army inside Iraq. And America is partly fighting now for its future in the world. They've got too few troops in Iraq and they can't contain it. And if they lose it and it fails as a state and splits into 3, a wave of energy will be released across the Middle East, which has already begun. And it will be the greatest boost to radical Islam, the defeat of the West. The defeat of the whites and the Jews as they see it. Their eradication in Iraq, the taking of large parts of Iraq and its oil by Iran. As we leave, and we retreated from Basra. We retreated from Basra, and for the last year we have served no military function by being there, which is why we retreated. It's not unpatriotic to say so, it's a factual statement, and the militarists and our soldiers on the ground know it. Spin can say contrary and propagandistic things on the front of the Sun, but the truth about our boys and so on. But we were being attacked 600 attacks a day before we left Basra Palace. Both of the Shia militias, Badr and the Sadrists, were attacking us every day. 90% of the violence was directed against us, because they wanted us out, so they can divide the spoils amongst themselves once we're gone. Now we created Iraq, just as we created Nigeria, just as we created many of these other countries. And when America invaded, they had no plan. They had a plan to take down a third world regime they didn't like. They wanted revenge for 9/11. There are about 10 interconnected reasons as to why they took down Iraq, but they had no plan for what follows. And this is the trouble for American power. Enormous strength. They've got the greatest strength of any state federation in the history of our species, but they don't really know what to do with it. And after the Second European Civil War, as I call it, the Second World War, white people across Europe lost their nerve. They lost their nerve morally and collectively. And the energy went to the communists in the East, who've now gone in the European and Eurasian context, and to the American global capitalists in the West. And we've been stuck in the middle. My view, and this is a dissentient one, is we haven't really had a proper government in one respect or another since before the First World War. We've moved with the times, we've shuffled and shifted, we've had one bourgeois group in after another, slightly centre-left, slightly centre-right, in the middle. We blundered and made do during the hungry 30s. We staggered into the Second World War. We lost all our money and had to be bailed out by the Americans. We had a mildly state socialist regime after the Second World War. The process which began mass multiracialism began in 1948 with the Nationality Act, when Attlee passed in the House of Commons an act which said, and this is what Attlee said in the House of Commons during the vote on it, the races of the world need to be mixed together. We have learned from a history of war and change. We have learned that peoples need to be mixed together so that they will become friends, and hostility will end. That is why a nodal point of 50,000 passports were disseminated in the Caribbean basin and in the post-Raj India, which we left when the flag was hauled down under Mountbatten in 1948. Then immigrants started coming. Then their extended families started coming. Then when they had beachheads, they brought in other people. Then you added the refugee codicils to UN treaties that we signed up to in the mid to late 1940s as the backwash from the Second War. Then you add in various other post-imperial groups in African and other societies, such as the Ugandan nations and the Kenyan nations, which he said he wouldn't let in, but then did for allegedly compassionate reasons during his left Tory administration between 1970 and 74. Gradually, more and more people have come. There's at least 6 million resident foreign Britons, in inverted commas, in the country, the better part of maybe 1 million plus illegal beyond that, and then you have all the people who are passing through. 17.5 million just pass through every year on visas and elsewhere. Half of them white, half of them non. The Tories manage this change to a certain degree. The Tories are at least in contact with the premises of national identity to the degree that they're worried about things if they turn sour. They allow basically, legally, the illegals nobody knows, and it's difficult to assess, and the state refuses in part to have proper statistics, but they are difficult to acquire. Up to 97 under Major and Thatcher before, less under her, 100,000 coming in. Blair tripled it, it's 300,000. That's 300,000 a year over 10 years. That's the 3 million that have come in under New Labour. New Labour partly sees many of these people as new voters for them. As a Labour councillor once said to me, they're the new proletariat. They'll vote for us because we give them the benefits and we give them the cheap jobs. And therefore they're our people. Of course, life's more complicated than that, because when Labour get in, they suddenly find they're part of the global elite, and they have to make decisions about Third World wars in the Third World. Wars in Iraq, wars in Afghanistan, wars in Sierra Leone, which are very unpopular outside the West. Turn off Western telly and listen to the English version of Al Jazeera. You'll realise what much of the rest of the world thinks about these wars. So on the one hand, they're the immigrant's friend, and on the other hand, they're bombing many of their co-racialists and co-religionists elsewhere in the world. This is what real power is like. You have to make choices. They want American strength, they want the American nuclear umbrella, they want the money that flows in, they want the kudos of being the 51st state of the Union on this side of the world, they want to be the bridge between the US and Europe and the structures of the European Union. Paradoxically, they want to go further into Europe, which means technically going further away from the United States, but you can configure that in a different way. But they don't really like the struggles that go with the reality of American dominance. Dominance always gets people against you. Before 9/11, at the turn of this millennium, there were certain people who said history had ended. There was a Japanese-American social scientist and historian called Fukuyama wrote a book called The End of History. It's all over. The future is shopping, and mass sport, and TV for all, and peace and harmony, and plenty for all. He's not an ecologist. Then planes went into the towers in New York, and people looked around and realised that the world had changed. Because when you have a great power, you raise great enmity in other groups. Now, Islam has been asleep in some respects, external to itself, external to the crescent between Morocco and Indonesia for 1,000 years. But it's woken up now in this millennium, and it doesn't like many Western policies. Blair is in the Middle East. Remember him, our ex-premier? He's in the Middle East pleading for peace, and that the Palestinians and the Israelis will make peace, which would certainly make things a lot easier for the present elite that runs the West. But they're not going to, because there's no possibility of a solution to that particular conflict. One group will dominate the other. That's how it always is. There's two groups on one bit of land. There's not room for two states. And persons of colour throughout the world support the Palestinian cause all over the world, even if they're the weaker ones now. When we have non-white MPs in our parliament, they go two ways. They either adhere to the present elite and mouth their politically correct slogans, or they adopt the view of the third world, if you like. There was, by the end of his life, a blind MP for Tottenham Hale in North London. He had diabetes, which can make you blind when you approach about 80, 75 years of age. He once praised the murder of a white policeman in Tottenham in a mass black riot that occurred in the state there.
Before he died, he was asked in the Commons about his view on the first Gulf War, never mind the second. He said it's a war by the white, racist West against persons of colour all over the world. And he said that as an ex-Afro-Caribbean, not as a Muslim, not as someone who has any particular identification with the Third World. Because they view the same events the other way round. We have a new Prime Minister now called Brown. And he says he's a listening Premier. And he's going to listen to what we want. And he's having consultation exercises where he invites people to schools and asks them, even some 9-year-old children, what they think about the world and what they think about Britain and what they think about New Labour's educational policy. And he says he's listening and listening. Well, he's not listening to the degree to his own manifesto, because he was elected on a manifesto that said he would allow a referendum on the European Constitution, which has now been reworked in an enabling treaty, but has kept 95% of its codicils in effect. So it's the same document, really, apart from a few symbolic things on the edge. And we won't have a referendum about that, or even though some trade union leaders want one, and maybe 100 of his own MPs want one. But they'll fight tooth and nail not to have one, because they know it's going to be rejected. That's the reason they don't want it. Those who want the referendum know it's going to say no, that's why they want it. And suddenly all these liberals who are completely all over us for a vote on everything don't want to have a vote. And think the masses are stupid and inane and influenced by Murdoch and the Sun, and we can't trust them with these votes. That's the point. That's why they don't want to have one. When we had our referendum on European entry in the 1970s, I was a grammar school boy then, and I walked through the town that I was in, and every bus shelter, there's about 50 of them, said, vote yes. Every shelter had a poster. Union Jack, European symbol of yesteryear, remember the old one with the stars, rather wimpy yellow stars in a circle. A real European flag, of course, a big eagle in the middle of that circle, but you won't have it on this very anemic light blue background. But there was, every bus stop said yes. This is democracy now. Vote yes. Don't remember to vote. Vote yes. Yes, yes. The CPI says yes. The TUC says yes. Prominent newsreaders say yes. The leaders of the Tories say yes. The Liberal Democrats say yes, yes. Half Labour leaders say yes. This is democracy. Everyone says yes. How dare you say no? I saw one vote no poster, probably put up by the Socialist Workers' Party of that era. This is 74, 5. And it was miscued on a bus shelter, you know, because it's the legal fly posting. You get the glue, you stick it on the thing. If you don't put the brush down it right, it sort of goes slightly to the side. And it said, vote no. Vote no. Skinner says no. Ben says no. And very interesting for them, anathema, Powell, Enoch Powell, said no. And their headquarters was a PO box number somewhere in East London, you know, and I said I've seen 57 vote yes posters, all paid for by big capital and big trade unions, and one tiny little vote no poster, but a third still voted no. And that's called the angry third, the third that can't be relied on, the third that's against everything, as Robert Kennedy once said in US politics. Now, the interesting thing is, on Europe, the Liberal project has failed. Why is that? Why can't they even get these votes through continental countries where philosophically and societally they're actually more predisposed to the project than we are here, and increasingly don't trust them to have a vote? Every country's trying to get out of their own people having votes on these matters because they want it decided by a liberal elite at the top. The reason is a lot of right-wing patriotic feeling has channeled itself. The issue of race and immigration, the issue of crime, race and immigration, the issue of falling social standards, and the absence of elitism, discipline and hierarchy in Western societies is too difficult. It's too difficult. That's why people vote UKIP in a European election rather than the British National Party. My own father said to me, you know, I've done something very radical. I said, fearing the worst, and I've been struck out of the will again. But he said, I voted UKIP. I thought, well. And then I thought, well, for somebody who sort of voted right, Liberal and Tory all his life, UKIP is radical. It's sort of, there will be people, you know, in the box whose hand will shake when they vote UKIP. This is what it's like. UKIP is a far-right party, as parts of the liberal left media denounce it. But it's all channeled into that one issue, which is in part a soft issue. Because people feel they can protest about that because it keeps you away from the other thing. When they have a UKIP leader, who I know people who've known him and met him for hours, who's regarded as a power-light even within UKIP, when he's on the box or the radio, the first thing he says, of course we're not a racist party. He doesn't say what the party's actually about. The first thing he says is to deny that it's not a politically incorrect organisation because he fears the onslaught that will come onto him. But of course, there's a degree to which what's happened, the fact that the liberal consensus has slightly broken its tooth on the European issue, is very useful. Because the desire to go to integration, to have a formal and federal state in Western Europe, partly as a response to the communism of yesteryear, but now that that's gone, that's no reason at all. Partly is to create a bloc. A big bloc for big capital that can then trade with the United States. The ultimate ideal of some of the federalists, who've actually had a high watermark now and are going down, was the creation of the USE, the United States of Europe. That's why each name changes as it goes along. First it's a common market. Trade, nothing, too important. Then it's a European community. Change. It's more integration. Then it's a European Union. A bit deeper, but not quite yet the United States of Europe. We don't have a European president who we regard as a president and who's on our stamps. We don't have a European parliamentary leader who speaks for Europe on Iraq and anything else as a bloc. We don't have a European defence minister. We don't have yet a European army, although all these institutions exist in embryo. You know, like they sort of pop-up books for children, you know? You open it and it springs up. These institutions are sort of embryonic. If they're given life by further integrated treaties, they will emerge. So you have the United States of Europe as against the United States of America, and maybe China as a bloc, a race that's a nation that's a state, if you like, 1.3 billion of them, coming up economically. So it's a world of blocks. It's odd, actually, because liberals preach about breaking blocks down, that we're all the same, that we're all interchangeable, yet the world that they're building is actually slightly defensive and block-based as well, because everybody partly gets the opposite of what they want. When Blair invaded Iraq, he said, we're doing it for peace. For peace, he said. Campbell. Do you remember Alistair Campbell? Whose political autobiography and diary is apparently the most left in hotel rooms. It's the book that's most left in hotel rooms in the last 6 months. So, but Campbell was Blair's Rottweiler and PR man. And when he went, Blair began to dip down because the gloss well and truly came off what was called the New Labour Project. Campbell said some remarkable things in the rise to Iraq. He said, we haven't lied about the war. The weapons of mass destruction exist. We're invading for peace. He said, we're actually going to war to impose human rights. This is very odd, isn't it? In Iraq, it's alleged that 600,000 have died. The Americans have lost 4,000. They've had 25,000 named. We've lost 200 plus men. There's 4 million displaced in Iraq, which is widely believed, and 2 million have exiled themselves from the country. Several hundred of thousand of them want to come here. Oh yes, and there's many of them here. Many tens of thousands are here. Their view being, you started this, you can give us asylum. We can't go to the shops in our town without somebody sort of manhandling our sister and sending us her hand in a jiffy bag later with a ransom. Because Iraq is convulsed with fear and violence now. And we invaded to give them democracy. We invaded to give them hope and a liberal future. And this is the problem with these incredibly naive and ferociously adolescent ideas and their imposition on the whole world and ourselves. Now, there are many people who say, why is this chap talking about the rest of the world? Why don't you just concentrate on this country? Because this country is all that matters. But the truth of the matter is that although from one perspective, this is our country and this is the one that matters, we're now locked into systems that bring much of the rest of the world here in one form or another. It brings immigrants here, it brings foreign money here, it brings foreign ownership here, it brings foreign weaponry here, we go out in wars over there, and violence comes here by virtue of a rebound. A couple of weeks ago, about 2 months now, on the weekend after Brown became Premier, a series of Arab doctors, pretty well-educated men, tried to blow themselves up in a centre of London, outside a female nightclub. They had a nail incendiary bomb, and they also drove a truck, a four-wheel drive vehicle, into the frontispiece of Glasgow Airport. There was consternation in Scotland, because there's quite a bit of, because of the rise of the SNP, liberal nationalists and Celtic nationalists and sort of liberal tartan feeling in Scotland. And people say, it's nothing to do with us. We're not tied into these English imperialist adventures. There are Scottish regiments in Iraq, there are Scottish regiments in Afghanistan, they've often been the backbone of the British Army, they go everywhere without the English fighting in the rest of the world. No Western nation who's sucked into these things is immune. They hit Glasgow because from the outside grounds of Scott, and they're going to hit to make a symbolic point. The one who got out of the vehicle was on fire and attacked people who tried to sort of stop him attacking them or even put the fire out, was smiling as he was on fire because he's going to heaven, because he's engaged in jihad. Now, and these are doctors. These are not men from the slums of Baghdad. They're not from Sadr City, where people can't sort of read or write. This is people from the elites in these groups who are prepared to engage in revolutionary war at a personal level, because they've probably seen an American attack helicopter take down houses in their villages. And people they've known have been napalm. The Americans don't call it napalm anymore, they call it white phosphorus. And white phosphorus burns down to the bone. And when this happens, people want revenge. And they then associate themselves with networks that put them in touch with other people that facilitate the prospect of that revenge. Now, at the moment, it's exploding trucks and bombs and gas cylinders and things like that. But not forever. You know, we're now living in a world where people can hijack a plane and fly it into a nuclear power plant, which is certainly one of the things Al-Qaeda would like to do. And nuclear weapons are proliferating. By the end of this century, almost every third world society will have nuclear weapons. It's a conservative and old-fashioned technology. It's 60 years old. The Germans, ourselves, the French and the Americans began the experiments that led to it, and that have led to it in the 1930s. 34 countries, according to the United Nations, including Iran, about which we hear a great deal because it's a threat to Israel. That's why. But 33 others are developing these weapons. And they will have them relatively soon. The trouble with it, of course, is that in a strange way, it makes everything very dangerous at one level, but it also stabilises it as well. In actual fact, because if Iran gets the weapons, Israel has them already, Turkey will get them very quickly, they'll all counterbalance each other and freeze, because they've got these mass weapons of destruction. Pakistan and India hated each other, have fought, I believe, 4 wars since independence. They massed about 8 years ago on the borders. A million men massed on the borders on the Green Line waiting for the signal. And their leaders couldn't do it. There was a nationalist party in India then called the BJP. And they couldn't do it because they had nuclear weapons. There was a policy paper produced by the Indian government which said we're prepared to lose 160 million in a nuclear exchange because we can win. And other people thought, but then again, will it be worth living in a continent that's lost that much in order to quote-unquote win? And then it's mutually assured destruction, the doctrine is, so they backed off. So nuclear weapons are odd. But the problem that we have now is that states may not use nuclear weapons. But if these weapons are decanted down into paramilitary groups, and into terrorist groups, and into groups which are partial states, like Hezbollah, and others, and if they have the delivery systems for these weapons, then the world does face a devastating future, because these are groups that aren't states, and that will use these weapons for ideological reasons. That's the problem. And in the future, certain third world countries will seek to get their own back, quote unquote, by decanting mass weapons from rogue states and from third world societies that feel alienated and estranged from contemporary versions of Western power. And they'll give them to groups like Hamas and like Hezbollah and like others, because the whole wave of this thinking and feeling is growing inside parts of the third world. And as all this is happening, and convulsions are occurring, we're asleep. And we're pretending that life isn't like it's always been. And we're pretending that as long as we go on apologising for our past, and we apologise for slavery, and we apologise for dominating a quarter of the world. This is in a British context now. And we go around, as Mayor Livingston does in London, saying that the bombings on the 7th of July were an attack upon multicultural and multiracial London, that they were an attack upon the civic pride of white and black and yellow and brown Londoners all united as one fist. These are the sort of things he said when he came back from the country from his Singaporean jaunt, where he was trying to get the Olympics or wherever he was at that time. They've attacked us. He said the reason why he wants to get rid of many of our classical statues from the centre of Trafalgar Square and elsewhere is because if we go the whole hog, we deny our own history before 1912, we repudiate empire, 100 years of it and more. We repudiate slavery. We repudiate crushing Sooty and the worship of Kali in India. We repudiate everything we've ever done. We embrace everyone. We apologise for everything. We say everything's equal. We say that we love all, and love is the principle of life, that we will not face any ire or any blowback from other groups, inside or outside the West. Well, the world isn't like that. The world isn't like that. American senators now say, we didn't see the insurgency coming. What did they expect when they invaded a country where every male owns a Kalashnikov? What did they expect when they broke down the Iraqi army, but allowed them to keep their grenades and their bazookas and their Kalashnikovs? What did they expect from the Baathists? Saddam's last laugh, even when he was hanged, in the last days his regime opened the door to Al-Qaeda and to other groups. And Al-Qaeda is only 10% of the insurgency in Iraq. Most of the insurgents are killing Westerners because they want them out of their country, because they're nationalists. That's right. And many Westerners say, Western jurists and liberals and conservatives, Petraeus is going to report this week on Capitol Hill about the surge. He says that to win that war, America's going to have to stay there for 20 years. 9 to 16 years. And he knows, because Petraeus is a very intelligent man, probably the most intelligent general his generation produced from West Point, he knows they haven't got the stomach for 20 more months. By saying they're going to have to spend 20 more years there, he knows that that is the signal to pull out. Because the whole political class has lost the courage. They don't have to fight in them for it. Many of the Americans who are maimed and come back as paraplegics and there's nothing left, because many of their enemies use perforated bullets. One of those three, your spine goes out the other end. Not when you go back to Kansas, you live in a chair for the rest of your life. It's on Medicare. There's not much left. And they haven't got the stomach for 20 years of that. No way. They'll be out. We're out by the end of the year. And we'll have a residual special force there, round the airport in Basra, attacked 24 hours a day, not doing very much, as a symbolic statement that we're standing by the Americans, but really we've got out. We will then switch many of our men to Afghanistan. Many of our men are woefully under-equipped, and they're badly paid in relation to what they could be doing. But the fighting devolves to them. The war in Afghanistan is probably lost as well, actually. Because the truth is, these liberal imperialist wars don't work. You either have naked imperialism, which is pretty hard and pretty vicious, although we run it in our way pretty well, for centuries. Or you don't invade these countries at all, and you keep well clear. And you sort your own society out before you go around the world blundering into other places. Particularly in the case of the United States, where there's a generalised affection for everyone, but a knowledge of nobody in their specifics. This is the very odd thing about liberalism. They say that we're the bigots, that we're the ones who are against everyone, but they don't really care for these groups. They embrace them with a shallow universal love, but there's no knowledge of these other groups in their specificity. Iraq's 3 nations in one. It's an totalitarian religious society. Oh, well, they're just like us. They are distinctively different. They're fighting for the rights of their own difference now. If you understood the nature of identity, you'd understand what motivates these people. But in the end, we're concerned with our identity, and our future, and our nationality, and our culture. This is what concerns us. We're at a dangerous stage in our development as a nation and as white people. Depending how you look at it, we're now 8%. To 12 to 14% of humanity, of mankind. We used to be over a third at one time. So we've contracted. No politician in the West evinces direct Western pride except for fringe politicians, like Le Pen in France. Nobody in the mainstream says they're proud to be British, French, white American and so on, if there is any ethnic or racial tag that relates to Caucasia. Nobody says they're proud of the West's history in a way that takes direct responsibility for the elements of ferocity and destruction that's been part of our group, that has been part of every other. And if we don't have a political leadership that will defend the indigenous majority throughout the West, in England, in Britain and further afield, we will become prey to other groups as more come here, as we're dragged on the coattails of American decline into more conflicts, because more are stoking up. Although America may face humiliation in Iraq, people would like an attack on Iran, that some believe is 3 years away from nuclear weapons now. Iran's far more powerful, 10 times more sophisticated, adaptive and advanced than Iraq, even though they killed each other in a stalemate war. The Iraq-Iran war of yesteryear, where we supported Saddam, because he was our man in the Gulf. This is how it works. You see, you're a demon 1 minute, and you're a liberator the next. You're our friend 1 moment, you're out on your ear the next. This is the reality of power. He was a tyrant, but he was a tyrant that we could live with. And in fact, if we'd had any sense about Iraq, the West would have, and the American guys would have invaded, taken down his regime, put in a military dictatorship, and left. Instead, we've stayed there, we've become bogged down there, we've had a totally falsely idealistic premise upon which the war was fought, that you fight a war to liberate a people, introduce mass democracy. Even that's based on lies. One of the things that happens to the West is that so many of our people know nothing about their own history. Their entire imperial past, to most people, it's just a blank. They walk around our cities, they look at these buildings, they look at these statues. It actually means nothing to them. It's just a sort of theme park, basically. Blair said at the height of the early part of the Iraq War that they never had an election there, that we're bringing them elections. That's a lie. We arranged an election in Iraq in 1924, and the Shia boycotted it, and the Sunnis took the state until Saddam was overthrown, because he was a Sunni leader, not an Iraqi one. And there's a degree to which lying becomes possible when people know nothing about anything, and when my people are totally miseducated, when they think that English culture is what the Beckhams do. Then when you can make anything up, you can make the world up as you go along, because there's no past to anchor it to and to base itself upon. A people that has no past or recollection of it has no future, because its present is a confusion. That's the fact. And that's the state that many of us are in. And many people would say, that's going on a bit, isn't it? But I do agree with him, actually. But they will vote Conservative, they will vote Liberal Democrat, probably as a meaningless protest against the other two blocks, depending where they are in the country, and they will vote Labour, New Labour. People say they hate Labour, and they'll still vote Labour. You'll knock on doors in Newcastle and Liverpool, and people will say, oh, Labour, Labour till I die. Would you like mass immigration? Labour. You say, cry, isn't it going up? No, Labour's got the vote, mate. Labour. And of course, although the language will be different, and the articulation will be posher, in the blue suburbs down here, it's the same the other way around. It's very funny, because I canvassed once for this party in Havering. And the response you get on that, Havering consists of an enormous number of white working class people who've moved out to Essex. Why? To get out of East End. Why do they want to get out of East End? Because if you stand in Mile End Station, whites are 10%. 10%. That's why they've gone into Essex. And many of these people have made good, of course. They're partly Thatcher's children. You go down their drives and there's 3 Jags. And you knock on the door and they say, all right, mate. And you say, I'm with the British National Party. And they say, you don't look like one of those. And they'll vote, many of them will vote for you. They candidate gone, 26%, 20%, something like that. So there's an element there. The Labour people just look at you. You know, you can hear the leaflet ripping behind the door as it closes, you know. Occasionally the Tories are interesting, because you bang on the door and a Tory woman will look at you and then she'll go, British National Party, no. So there's a snobbery there, essentially. That's what it is, and the door closes, Click, the click, of finality and rejection, I knocked on one door and an old girl answered it, and she said, British National Party. She went, no! She said, you're Nazis! She said, Nazi! And I said, can I put you down as a possible? And she veered across the road to talk to Vera or some year-old mate about this dreadful bloke who was on her doorstep. And I was nice, I had a tie on, I'd taken my sort of pagan symbol off, I was being very polite, But those roads that I canvassed, it's interesting this, exactly correlated to the vote. A couple of screamers, very small Labour support, big Tory and resident support, which is Tory and other guys, few fringe people, UKIP, and 20% for the British National Party. And lo and behold, that was the breakdown in that particular ward. So in actual fact, if you do canvass, virtually, unless it's a very mixed ward, so sociologically, what you're going to get. Now, when the British National Party stands across Britain with any sort of a campaign, and anything beyond just one leaflet bunged out a week before, with a face, this could be anybody's, they get 15%. 15%. And bearing in mind England is now 15% non-white, that means a much bigger proportion of the indigenous population is voting. It's basically 1 in 5. And that's why there's very little mention of this political party in the mass media. In the past, extremists sold newspapers and magazines, and silly, frothy Channel 4 horror videos were made, basically. Don't have them now. Because they realise there is a vote there and it's dangerous. Because if the party emerged suddenly, if it was a catalepsy, if there was a shock, and people came through, got into Parliament, got into the London Assembly, got into the European Parliament, it's not another Liberal party, you see. The UKIP and the Greens and the others don't really matter. Everything will react to the success of the radical right coming in. Everything will react. The centre-right will have a choice. They'll either join the rest of the centre, the Liberals per se, or they actually try and tackle it rightwards to soak up some of that energy. The left will be ferocious. We fought the Second World War to stop these people. It's coming back. They shall not pass. The screaming will begin. But of course, we now live in societies where large proportions of cities are partly ethnically in the second, third and fourth world. White people are already a minority in Leicester. Within 5 years will be a minority in Birmingham. In large parts of London, parts of inner London, Bethnal Green, Tower Hamlets, Limehouse, Chapel, all these Bow, Cockney, if you can hear the bells. 70% of those non-white now. And so on. These sorts of things. My mother was born in Manchester. She was born in somewhere called Moston. Moston's 80% Asian now. So these areas, in central Birmingham, whites call these areas the occupied territories. That's what Brummies call them. Because they moved out. Handsworth is 99% non-white. Because all the whites are left. They've up and completely gone into other areas like Erdington and so on. They've gone. And the irony is that in a sense we're remembering these areas because all of these groups now partly just about get along, but they organise against each other. Sikhs will have their own districts, they have their own shops, they have their own line posts which they actually paint in their own ideological colours because they've got their own country called Khalistan inside India and they paint it in those colours. Blacks will have their own districts. Afro-Caribbeans often get it in the neck because Africans don't really like them. Africans will put up different colours on map posts. They celebrate their own New Year. Each group celebrates its own festivities. All a bit of subsidising from Birmingham City Council and so on. Because in a way they're doing what all human groups do. They seek territory, birds of a feather flock together, they maximise their own strength, they put forward their own culture. Belonging, identity, power. All groups seek power, which is the energy of where you are and where you can live. And liberal theories that all can come and all can have plenty and all are pleasant and all can join in are false. Because it's not the nature of ourselves or them. It's not the nature of our species to be like that. If everything's rosy, people can just about knock along. But as soon as there's a dip and there's difficulties, The tension and the energy comes out. All groups have vanguards that are more aggressive, more leadership-oriented than the bulk of people who are just passive and want an ordinary life. My father says to me, what are you speaking at these meetings for? Why can't you be normal? Why can't you be like the others? Why can't you just sort of leave it all alone, leave it to somebody else? We don't want any trouble. And of course, life isn't like that. The idea that we don't want any trouble and we don't want any difficulty will mean that within 100 years we will technically and absolutely be reduced to a minority north, south, east and west. In England, in Scotland, in Wales, in Ireland, north and south. In the whole of the British Isles. And it's coming. And when you are a minority, you play all the games, which is what political correctness is. It's a game. Anyone who says anything, you use it against them, you assert yourself by saying you're a victim, and then we've got a right to say it, and you play all these games, which is what it is in wrestling, and arm wrestling, no, it's my counter, no, you said this remark, I'm having you up before this committee. You do all this sort of nonsense, and we'll be playing these games. We'll be reduced to this in our own country, in our own land, in our own society. And you can knock on a door and somebody will say, I don't care. It's got nothing to do with me. And that's because, you see, people are leaderless. People need leadership. And the problem is our leadership, the political class, Labour, Tory, Liberal and others, that people actually look to, they've gone elsewhere. They don't care about this country anymore. I've spoken to many Tory Labourers. I knew William Hague when we were both 18. And Hague said to me, well, you know, what this country once wanted is... He said, people like him once said to me, people in Cameron's team once said to me, years ago, the old Britain is over. We can rule what's left. Members of the Shadow Cabinet have said that to me. They see themselves as ruling the ruins. The culture of the ruins of culture. Somebody who's one of the Shadow Ministers once said to me, we've gone global. The world's our country now because they all speak English. What will happen is that the poor whites we don't care about. We're the elite. We will run the country in our own image. And who's in the streets doesn't matter because we have the power. And this is the voice of the real elite. This isn't the soft words you get on the telly. And everyone who gets on in EastEnders, you know. Or the sort of Asian marriages and transsexuals on Coronation Street, you know. This is the real elite talking. And we have a choice. Because every time you vote Tory, New Labour and Liberal, with different wordage and discussion about 20% that they agree to disagree on, that's what you're going to get. And you're going to get more of it, not less. If you vote for them, you'll get more immigration. If you vote for them, you'll get more laws to prevent people saying they have an issue about it. If you vote for them, you'll get more foreign adventures. If you vote for them, you'll get less indigenous jobs. More people leaving the country. 1.6 million whites have left this country, never to come back, they say, since 97. Probably about 3 million since 1990, many of them in Australia. Argentina even. The US. Canada, members of my own family are in America. Canada. I said to one of them, why have you gone? And he said, don't you know? I said, well, I do know, but he said, I can't say. I said, well, I'm your brother-in-law, for God's sake. You know, can't you come out with it? You know, you're so gutless, you can't come out with it. Even on a transatlantic plane line, who do you think's listening? But he said, no, it's the country's changed out of all recognition. All the masses of my family. I'm off. You know, it's an honest answer in a way, because there are millions who are thinking like this. But the trouble is that they will find that the processes that are unleashed here may be a bit more dormant in Vancouver, where this particular individual is, but they're coming. One of them's in Texas. The city he lives in has an enormous black ghetto in its centre that no whites ever go near, even drive through. And they're a minority when you add in Hispanics, white Americans in that part of that state. Bush, for instance, is regarded as an utterly hardline man. Leftists in Britain will say he's a Christian fundamentalist, he's a reactionary, he's a moron, he's this and that. He wanted to pass a law that naturalised 18 million illegal immigrants inside the United States. And he told the Senate and Congress, we do it out of love. We do it out of Christian compassion. See, the idea that Bush is a hardliner on these salutary issues, maybe like the influence of the Christian right, he can reject stem cell research. But when it comes to something like mass illegal immigration, which is completely changing the character of the United States, which the whites took ruthlessly from the Red Indians who were there, don't forget, life always involves conquest. And if you forget that principle, you become a marginal group, pleading for pity later on. We've got a parliament in the centre of London, where the two houses, the House of Commons and the House of Lords, we've just erected a statue to Nelson Mandela in Parliament Square. It was initially going to go in Trafalgar Square, but that place is presently occupied by a sub-neoclassical work of a pregnant thalidomide victim. So it couldn't go there, so it's gone to Parliament Square instead. Initially, they wanted £400,000 by private subscription, I think, to mount that sculpture. They got about a half of it, which is why it's slightly shorter, because the money was less to fulfil the sculptural obligation. So, in Trafalgar Square, we've got a thalidomide victim, and in Central Square, our central thoroughfare in the centre of a post-imperial city, celebrating the greatest naval battle we've ever had. And in our parliament, we've got essentially a philo-communist, but now liberal, ex-terrorist in our Parliament Square. What does that say about our elite? Which country, other than ours, would have these sorts of people? Most second, third, fourth world countries, they'd have some ferocious military commander, or they'd have an ex-leader or potentate, or they'd have a religious leader, or they'd have somebody from their own group that manifested strength and power. In Argentina, in Brazil, in Iran, in Kazakhstan, in Nigeria, they wouldn't have sculptures which are jeering and laughing, essentially, at the premises of the culture of the indigenous population on display, paid for in part by our money. It's a part of the liberal elite laughing at their own population. And if people say, oh, I don't quite agree with that, you say, oh, you're a reactionary. You're one of those fascists that's against progressive futures. It's only when people are prepared to do political acts and vote in a way that's conscious of those ideas that that sort of stuff will be swept away or put in fringe museums and in fringe galleries and so on. Because that manifests what exists now. Livingston was asked last year why the Greater London Authority didn't celebrate St George's Day. And he said because it's racist. He said it's a fascist ceremony of Livingston is real. He really is a left-winger. And he said it's a fascist ceremony of indigenous white racialism. And we celebrate a multicultural London. And he said any of this indigenous stuff feeds the BNP and the right in this country. And he's totally right, and he's totally ideological at one level, because he's a half leftist, not one of these soft-soaking leftists. He began in an anarchist group called Solidarity. On the extreme left, he's come in a bit into the left wing of the Labour Party. He's always been a populist leftist and a sort of individualist, go his own track politician. But he's real about these sorts of issues, far more truthful in his own way than Brown and Blair. He gives it to you straight, in reverse. He was asked about political correctness in the 80s when the GLC existed, his first big London forum, if you like, which Thatcher and Tebbit later abolished. And he said, political correctness, forget all this garbage in the media, that it's about bar black sheep and banning gingerbread men, and silliness. He said, political correctness is about imposing hardline ideas to enforce racial and gender equality. It's hard left ideas which we're imposing on people who don't want to join progressive modernity. This is the real left talking. Not shallow stuff round the edges. Political correctness is about manipulating power so people can't say they're against what's happening now. That's why it's introduced. Everything else is just fluff. And that's why people have to realise that if they're going to stand up against this, it's not risk-free. And it's difficult. And that's why people are so averse to doing it. But everything changes. And there will probably come a time when a significant subsection of our own population has a choice. They either sink or they go abroad, or they decide to do something in a very English and British way about what is occurring. And the only political vehicle that exists at the moment is the British National Party and right-wing politics. The future is uncertain. Forces can suddenly emerge in the scope of 2 years. Turkey is now controlled by a party that was only formed about 7 years ago. Things can change extraordinarily quickly, particularly when people get worried. And the reason that political correctness is imposed now from every brain radio station on every TV channel, a politician can be hunted to extinction for the slightest remark that's incorrect. They're forced to make Soviet-style mea culpas. Tories weep and say, I'm sorry, I made a racist remark at a rugby club dinner. I'm sorry. You know, these atonements are forced on people. But that very fact indicates that there's a worry in the system, there's a shudder in the system, because when you've got to impose it like that, totally contrary to our traditions of sort of tolerant freedom of respect for opinions within our own group, when you've got to impose it like that, it means that there's a danger that a significant section of the population is thinking the contrary, which is why you have to push them in public to say the opposite. So in closing, I'd like to ask people to do what they can to give money to right-wing organisations such as this, to leaflet and canvass for it, to persuade people to join it, to come to its meetings, and to support their country and their civilization and their ethnicity and their race and the culture which is created for England, for Britain, for the Western and the European civilization, and what we have given the world and what we still can if we revive. Thank you very much.
Jonathan, do you think there'll be a sudden crash, as you say, because it's going against the grain in this country, like there was at the Eastern Bloc in 1990, it'll go with a bang?
Yes, I think changes are either grinding and slow or quick and rapid.
Yeah.
I think if there's going to be a change, it will be very quick. If there's not going to be a change, it will be a grinding and slow whimper. So I think if change is possible and occurs, it will be rapid. You won't get a slow, sort of endless sea of change. You'll get a slow, endless sea of decline. Change means radicalism, which could be something worse than we've got, but opens up the other side, the prospect of something better. And the energy of reversal is coming from the people who are against what exists now. Chat there?
Yeah. A couple of years ago, I went to a dinner of the Traditional British Society, extreme right-wing conservatives.
Yes.
And it's today your leader was acquitted.
Yes.
And all they talked about was the BNP. I don't know, Simon Heffer was the head of the writer.
Yes, sure.
He said that day, I don't know how he got his facts, donations had trebled, and there were 3 protest meetings in America demanding free speech for England.
Huh.
And
Yes.
the establishment were very worried. And going on some of the things you said, this racialism, the word, is to you abracadabra. I wrote a booklet on it. And look for a magic word that got you what you wanted. And they found this, but no one knows what the bloody hell it means.
It means what you want.
It means what you want. When I was in Africa, we were told ad nauseum, Africa for the Africans. City jobs has got to go to them, and I had to go, and hundreds of my friends. When I came to England, I'm told, oh, you're racial. If I said England, for the English. And their bastard Saint Nereri was the first man to ethnically cleanse all the German settlers who built the country. And he said, Africa's for blacks. Hard luck, you've got to go. 1977.
Yes, Indian subcontinent,
Yeah.
Indian Republic has similar.
No one ever found. When the Race Relations Act came in 65, it wasn't done to stop hatred, because we had the petition law, and they opened it. It was done to stop discussion. So the British people would not be allowed to discuss what's happening. And you talk to anyone in the street, they all worry what they can say. They gagged us with it, and the next step was the last is
yes, and your question is?
My question is, as the gent said, I've asked, do you think we'll have violent revolution?
Well, we've had a lot of it in Ireland, of course. Marx in the 19th century said England's and Britain's suppressed violence comes out in Ireland. And there's a political remark. There's a streak of truth there. The idea that nothing of that sort could ever happen here is untrue. The fact is that few people want that, because that's just the nature of human life. Violence in England is complicated, and in Britain generally. The idea, as many foreign Europeans find when they come here, that this is a very Pacific island, that nothing ever goes on here, is quite false. You walk through many a city on Saturday night, and there'll be 40-year-old men rolling in the gutter fighting with each other. There's always been a strong subtext of social quarrel and internal violence in English life, and yet it completely avoids the political area and locates itself around football, family tribalism, north-south disputes, drunken forays and so on. It hasn't really taken a really violent political form since 18th century electioneering and our civil war in the 1600s. But the trouble is that there were riots, very serious racial rioting in Oldham and in certain northern towns in the early part of the millennium. Because when things start, areas segregate, as occurred between Loyalist and Republican areas where people are completely of the same race, of course, but violently divided over religion and communitarian belonging in Ulster. There's always that possibility. Democratic politicians can't want that and wish to sustain a situation where that doesn't occur, partly by giving political representation to identity. Indeed, if you actually allow politicians to emerge who represent identity, you often stop conflict because you give people another option and another choice through which they can express who and what they are. Another question, please.
Do you write any columns in your national newspapers?
No, I wouldn't be allowed to.
I
did. I wrote things in the past because I was in the Tories many, many years ago. I made a choice a long time ago because the generation of Michael Gove, Cameron's younger than me, but the generation of the people around him, just about, were in the Tory party, were in the Federation of Conservative Students, were in the National Association of Conservative Graduates when I was in it. And they've made peace with what exists now. William Hague said to me, he said, Jonathan, he said, why are you becoming a fascist? and I said, you have to understand that's the term they use. And I said, well, I don't want this society to become what it's quite clearly beginning to become. This is the early 80s. And he said, there's no alternative. There's no alternative. You either stick with us or you go outside. Cameron is actually saying that 25 years long, directly. A Mancunian councillor from a white part of South Manchester said she didn't want an Asian Tory MP to be selected as part of the A-list that Cameron's introduced, so-called A-list. And Cameron said, get out. There's a party you can join, love. Get out. We know which party he's talking about. You can clear up to them. He's making it quite clear. In the past, the Tories would tolerate some right-wing populism, some Powellites, some anti-federalites who shifted a bit further. No longer. If you come out with this stuff, we'll be purged. When I was 18, there were a brace of MPs who could have been in the Pence party, inside the Tory party. Bell, Amory, all these people. Everyone knew they were there. They're dead now. That's gone. The coherent right within the Tory party no longer really exists. The choice is accept what's happened or go outside. And if Cameron and these others were here and they were prepared to be honest, they would say, if you want to oppose what's happened, it will involve conflict within our society. And we don't want that. I attended dinners with these people like them, 15, 17 years ago, and they said, Power was a genius, he was the last to speak, but it's happened now. It may have been a disaster. They could be in serious trouble for even vouchsafing this now. But nothing can be done. I had editors of national newspapers sat in front of the table where I was with others, and they say, nothing can be done. These far-right parties, this is what they say amongst themselves, these far-right parties are for the plebs, they're for those who can't accept what's happened. If you can't take it, go abroad. Because this is what they think, because they're too cowardly to do anything else. And they're too integrated into what exists now to want to do anything else. But in their hearts, they wish it hadn't happened. They wish they hadn't happened. One of Cameron's key aides said to me 14 years ago, he said it's un-British to oppose what's happened. Because he said it involves intolerance. And I said, well, what about tolerance for our identity then? And he said, we can't go there. We can't go there. We've got to go with what's happened. And he said to me, and we've got to plead for forgiveness from these other groups. Plead for forgiveness from these other groups, because they might come for us later. This is what they say amongst themselves. Because you see, there's two discourses in the society. What people say in the public space, and what people say behind. And it will be very, very interesting if people could actually know what the people they see on the box all the time actually say behind. Because in actual fact, they'd be quite amazed actually, in a sort of dispiriting way. But they'd have to realise that that entire establishment's been given up. It's given up. Alan Clark was an oddball, you know, and Powell was the last to speak. Powell was the last to speak. That's why when he died, they all attended his funeral. Everyone attended his funeral. What a great man he was. But the reason they were attending the funeral wasn't because he wrote lyrics in ancient Greek. Wasn't because he became a Unionist MP. Wasn't because he was opposed to the EU. There's been loads of politicians on the Labour side who are opposed to the EU. It's because he spoke about race and immigration in '68, which catapulted him from a fringe right-wing liberal economist in the Tory party to a person of universal importance. That's why he spoke. When Paul Foot, the Trotskyist journalist, said this man is the most dangerous man in Britain, it's because he'd become so. Skinheads in Chelsea, sort of on the Chelsea shed, used to shout, Enoch, Enoch, Enoch. A man who in one sense had nothing in common with them at all. But what they were chanting his name for was because he'd spoken for them. And he was the last to speak for them. And I attended a meeting with Powell the year before he died. And somebody said, but you wanted violence, you talked about rivers of blood. And you know, he never lost his Birmingham accent. He said, my dear boy, he said, rivers of blood is from Virgil. I was just looking into the future. If you allow the world to come to your own country, what do you think will happen? He said, look at the reverse. If we were Vietnamese and 70 million whites came to us, that's what had happened to the United States by the time that he spoke. What do you think would happen? And the chap just threw up his hands and said, we can't do anything. So that's what it's like. It's either we will have the courage to form a new elite from out of the indigenous population, from rather tough-minded people from the three major classes, or we won't. That's the fact. Any more questions? Just one in the front, please.
Jonathan, you mentioned class, but wouldn't you accept the thesis that the politics of social class is in fact dead, and what has taken its place is the politics of identity, as expressed classically by our own party?
Yes, that's what's happened, and of course you will get overlap of the old style class politics, you will. So we're in a paradoxical situation. The BNP voters broadly are working class people. The West always said they represented the working class, and the white working class is now the most right-wing part of the society. That's always the paradox. But a lot of white working class people loathe the Tories, but like right-wing ideas because they're very, very socially conservative. That's why the far right appeals to them. If I was in a Tory party meeting, got a lot of white working class people, you know, look at me, look at the bow tie and all this, they wouldn't like it. But if I'm in a far right meeting, they think that's all right. And that bloke's speaking for us. That's what they think, explicitly. The middle class, of course, is a problem for the radical right. Leaders will emerge from it, articulate and intelligent people, but the bulk of them will hang back, frightened of tribalism, frightened of raw expressions of national identity. But of course there's deep wells of right-wing and patriotic feeling in the middle class, dammed up, deep radicalism there, well beyond just blue types of radicalism. The problem about these things is that they're never clear cut. You see, it's true that we've really shifted to a type of racial politics, really, but no one dares say so.